Hello there and welcome everyone to Unboxing Umbraco 8.15. My name is Rune. I'm the product communications producer at Umbraco, and today I'm joined by, as always, Warren Buckley, developer advocate at Umbraco, and Shannon, senior developer in the core team, I guess. Thanks for joining me today, guys. I'll just share my screen so we can take a look at the release blog post for Umbraco 8.15, and we'll go through a few of the highlights in the release. Now, if you've been following along with the release candidate, kind of the big new feature or features, I guess, is the all of the work that has been done in terms of making Umbraco faster, using less memory, also known as reduced footprint on the product roadmap. So it's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of work that's been done over the last few months. And the reason I invited you, Shannon, is because you have been working on this. So what's going on? What's happening? How much faster are we?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, I guess. So I guess just from the blog post here, we talk about changes to block list editor. This is also block list editor and nested content, so they both get the same updates. It basically comes down to how things were made originally, and deep down in the depths of code in things like property value converters and such things like that. Is there is just too much loop iteration and too much allocation that was just unnecessary. So because we've got blocks within blocks within blocks, or nested ones, we were just doing the same thing too many times, which we didn't need to do. So we've kind of unwinded how that works, and it just reduces the performance and allocations, which reduce the memory and garbage collector overhead for those two things. And since those are pretty common editors, and when people have a lot of blocks on a page, it was kind of crawling to a snail's pace for some editors. So that should all be resolved now, so that's pretty good.
So is that mainly back office?
That's mainly
performance?
Well, no, that's not all back office. That's also some property value converters on the front end should have slightly increased performance. That wasn't the huge overhead though, but it was mostly back office for that one.
Yeah. Cool.
And that it comes down to also fewer database calls, etc. But yeah, that's back office kind of stuff. Now the other parts in this post, startup time and cache optimization, which also goes into the faster to boot header. There's a lot of information there as well. I assume if you want to know like the in-depth part of this, there's a link at the bottom of this to my performance talk at Code Garden. But a quick snapshot premise of how this works is our friend Chad from New Zealand has helped for about a year and a bit on these feature sets. And again, it optimizes a lot of code, less iterations, less allocations for one thing, but then it goes a whole nother step further, and it changes how new cache. So new cache is the content caching layer of Umbraco front end, which is all in memory, but that data has to get into the memory somehow, right? So we've got the local cache files, which are the fast way to get that into memory, and that hasn't really changed. But when you're hosting Umbraco on Azure Web Apps, Azure will move your site between workers, and when that happens, something called a cold boot happens, which means we have to read the database to populate the in-memory cache. So we've changed how that data is stored in the database. We've made it just much smaller and faster to read, and so serialize and deserialize with something called message pack and LZ for compression. So let's say you've got a huge Umbraco CMS install and you've got like 100,000 nodes. the amount of data in that table is going to be quite substantial, and that data has to flow from your SQL server to your web server. So there's some network latency involved. So the smaller we can make that data, the faster the transmission will be. And with message pack, because the serialization is actually quicker, message pack is a binary format. So the serialization and deserialization is faster than JSON. So not only is the transfer from your SQL server to your web server faster, but to unwrap that binary information into new cache is also faster. So it primarily affects cold boots, but cold boots happen quite a lot on Azure, and also especially if you're load balancing. So if you're load balancing and you scale out, that means new workers come online. Whenever a new worker comes online, you're in effect cold booting. So yeah, that just makes the whole startup time on Azure much quicker. You don't have to worry so much about cold boots anymore. Ideally, maybe one day in the future, we wouldn't even have to have the local cache files, and it would just all be from the database if we can make it fast enough. That's for another time.
Interesting. yeah. There's probably a lot of still that can things that can still be done, but it's really great to see all of these things coming together right now. And I was quite interested to learn about the things that are going on around string comparisons, because that actually has quite an effect as well, right?
So strings, if you look at a memory profiler, strings are always the top of the list. So the most allocations in your app, that's just what happens. So if you can reduce the amount of string allocations, that means there's less memory overhead and less garbage collector performance overhead, because it has to collect all of this additional memory all the time. So there's a trick in .NET, which has been around forever, called string interning. So it's basically just a pool of strings. So because Umbraco uses aliases a lot, like property type aliases, content type aliases, those are the same string over and over and over again throughout your application. So if we can intern those strings, it means we don't allocate the same alias over and over and over and over again. So some of this work is done to intern some of those aliases. There's still more to get done, but it has reduced the amount of strings. That will be an ongoing process. And I've also seen, like, Chad's already sent in another PR to do some more string interning, so that's pretty good.
That's amazing.
So on that same PR, well, he's kind of nudged things up a notch. So there's a kind of hidden feature in 8.15 called, it's basically property compression options. So these are not enabled by default, but the premise is that message pack is an LZ4 compression. So the whole serialized packet for a document is compressed. But what we do at the property level is we ask this new sort of provider, hey, should I compress this property data? And then it would double compress it, which means that when all that data gets into new cache, the property data remains compressed, which means in memory, in that snapshot, you're saving memory. Now, this is only going to be effective depending on the type of data you've got, but you're in full control. So one of the features that Chad put in 8.15 is it's a app setting switch where you can automatically compress preview data. So if you've got large amounts of preview data and you're using lots of block editors or JSON data or rich text data, that will remain compressed in memory, saving you potentially a substantial amount of overhead. Really, though, that comes down to your CMS and what you've got installed in there. But
and
some
I
cool
guess
options to play around with.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that goes for a lot of it, right? How much you're going to feel the impact of this depends on what your site is doing, how much data you've got in there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you've got a tiny site, like my site's not very big, it's just a blog site with some articles, you might be like, 400 nodes or something, you probably aren't going to see a tremendous amount of change because the data is already going to be pretty small. But if you've got, tens of thousands of content items and media items as well, there's a good chance you'll see some good performance improvements there. Yeah.
And then I also learned that it's kind of become more consistent. So how long time it takes to boot and things like that between different boots is more consistent now, which also, I guess that makes it easier to work with in general, right? When you have consistent boot times and all of this stuff.
So previously, cold boot times were a bit random, and that's because of how the code was put together. Not to do with how it was serialized or anything, but just how the looping and locking structure worked. So, you know, one of every 3 times would take 30 seconds to cold boot, even on a small site. And then the other times would take, you know, 5 seconds, which is pretty weird and inconsistent and something that we don't really want. So even if you don't have the message pack one enabled and you still use the traditional JSON serialization, the cold boot times are now still much faster and they're consistent every time. So that's a benefit. On that same topic, for new 8.15 releases, it uses the new message pack serialization for new cache, but for upgrades, you have to opt into it. And we just did that for just a safety reason for upgrades.
Yeah, cool. Well, fantastic work. It's really, really cool to see. And big high five for you, Rock, to Chad as well, who's put in a ton of time, his own time on all of this. So fantastic to see.
Yeah, I don't know what site he's running, but he seems to have like a CMS install that is substantially huge.
Yeah, so it might actually be warranted that he puts in that much time. That's really cool. Another kind of highlight in 8.15 is another round of updates to the new media picker 3 that was introduced in 8.14. There was a couple of improvements added to 14.1. So things like there were some conflicting aliases, or at least conflicting with the aliases that were used a lot, things like article and stuff like that. So a few improvements there, but in 8.15 there's actually quite a few updates to this as well. I don't know, Warren, have you been following along in this?
Yeah. It's been nice to see that Seb and Ronald, working together on this in terms of making sure the data is backwards compatible. I've been doing a lot of work and making sure that, it's not going to be fully bulletproof like the blog article mentions here, but it will at least get you 90% of the way. It's not all going to implode now like it did previously.
Yeah, so you can actually switch from Media Picker 2 to Media Picker 3, and it should just work. You don't have to migrate any data manually anymore.
No, exactly.
I guess that was a bit of an oversight, or we thought it was a bit more complicated than it actually turned out to be. But it's really great to see it come together in 8.15. Another feature we've got is a deep linking to dashboards. It's not a massive one, but it's actually pretty cool. This was developed for Umbraco Deploy and Umbraco Cloud, because in Umbraco Deploy we wanted to link from other places in the back office to the deployed dashboard, and that's made it into the open source CMS as well. And the way you can see and that it's working is a new query string parameter has been added in the back office here, just called dashboard, and then it has the alias of the dashboard. But that means that if you go to settings, for example, and navigate through the dashboards, and here you can actually see that the parameter is changing up here. And if we take that and let's see, go somewhere else, paste that in, then we'll get taken directly to the dashboard. So of course it's super useful for deploy, but I can see a lot of other use cases for this for everyone that's using Umbraco.
Yeah, I would imagine in terms of colleagues, when you're sending stuff on Slack or whatever, if you're working together on a site, it's just nice to be able to take a look at this, go and check out, say, for example, the health checks. What the heck is going on here? Yeah, why is one of the health checks not working? And you can obviously send a link straight to that section now.
It would also mean that for package developers, if you've got custom sections and custom dashboards, that you'd be able to link between them easily.
Yeah, exactly. It's really nice. And it's also like for documentation purposes, you can actually link directly to different dashboards as well. So quite nice. And then I think you have a little thing to demo as well, Warren?
Yes, I'd like to demo this just because it's easier sometimes to show stuff rather than talk through stuff. So in 8.15, we have, or prior to 8.15, we had unattended installs, but you would have to then manually go into the database and set up the username and the password. Now we have a way in Umbraco 8 or 8.15 to now automate this or do this. So I will set up a new database. I'm going to call it unboxing 8.15. And then I've got the 8.15 source code here. And then I'm going to get it ready for an unattended install. So the first thing is to have my database connection string. So here's the Umbraco DB DSN. So yeah, it's localhost in my case, unboxing 8.15, the usual, is the database connection string. Then the configuration status needs to be 8.15. So this is all the steps that you've done previously so far.
Same you demoed for 8.13 or whenever it was we introduced this.
And there's that new key that Shannon was talking about, the new cache serializer and message back. By default for new installs, it's enabled. So we've got install unattended as well. So then now the last piece of the puzzle is to have a JSON file available that lives in app data. So this from memory is attended user.json, and it takes a name, an email, and a password. So this is the same that you would have in the installer UI. Also, I would imagine you've linked to it on the blog post, Rune, but also if you prefer, you can do this with environment variables. So say if you had a CI pipeline, you could set environment variables to do this as opposed to having a JSON file on disk.
Yeah. And the reason this is awesome is because previously you had to go in and create the user after the install.
Yeah, and it was kind of tricky because you had no way to log in. So you couldn't do it by the UI. So you had to create some PowerShell or some C# code or go into the database manually to kind of create this user. So now if I just run the site, I'm going to get an unattended install. And the first thing I'm going to see is, rather than the installer UI, is the kind of no nodes, or I've got no content in my back office. There we go. And then if I go to log in, it was my email and it was password 1234. And there you go. I'm logged in now. And then you can see that I've got the username, unboxing with Rune is what I set. And just for security reasons, it's obviously a one-time operation. If you're doing it by the JSON file, we delete the file afterwards. So it's not going to be something you want to check in, obviously. So it's just something in terms of an easier way to do that process rather than fiddling around with databases and PowerShell or C# scripts.
Yeah. That's pretty easy. Very nice. And it's really nice to have the environment variables there as well if you're working with DevOps or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. If you're more into like automating pipelines or you're doing some testing and you need to spin up a test environment, now you can have an unattended database set up, have a back office user set up, and then, I don't know, if you need to do Cypress tests or, I don't know, anything else that you need to automate, and you could do. So that was it. That was the demo. Nice and quick and short. But I think 8.15 is looking super stellar. I still think we should call it 8-point Chad.
Yes.
Yeah. It should be an homage to him somewhere. We should get a plaque at the HQ or something like that.
Yep.
Very cool. Speaking of community contributions, 10 different or unique contributors for this release, and actually 4 of them, it's their first contribution to Umbraco. So they've gotten a nice new badge on our, really cool to see. And if you click here, you can actually go in and see the pull requests they've done. And I think it's really good inspiration for anyone who's thinking about maybe contributing, because it's actually some nice little contributions they've done. Some translation stuff. I think there's a fix to semantics, some HTML semantics, like just having the proper order of ULI elements and things like that. So it's kind of small contributions, but really great for first time contributors. That's very nice to see. And we are now up to, I think it's, 2,789 trees in our forest. So we talked about this a while back. For every release and for all the contributions that are made, we are now planting trees somewhere in the world. And as we can see on our plot here, I think this one is for the 8.15 release. So 25 trees has been planted for this one. Pretty neat. Well, hello there. There's a couple of breaking changes that's mostly related to the media picker stuff. And I mean, they shouldn't actually break things for most people. I imagine a lot of people aren't using the new media picker yet. So it's basically just some signatures on some methods that have changed and things like that. So it shouldn't be too big of a breaking change. Hopefully it won't affect too many people.
I think one of them is also an unbreaking change. Because we broke something in 8.14, which is now fixed, I think, in 8.14.1 or 2, but also fixed in 8.15.
Yeah, definitely. And then there are some functional changes. So if you have implemented things with 8.14, I mean, most of it should work, but things have been optimized a bit. So you can read about that here under the functional changes as well. There's a known issue as well at the moment. This relates to Umbraco Cloud. So because the reduced footprint stuff introduces some new dependencies for Umbraco, we haven't been able to get the upgrader to play nice with these quite yet. We're working on it, and that will be done very soon. But that means that currently you cannot click the upgrade button on your projects in Umbraco Cloud and automatically upgrade to 8.15. As I said, it will be enabled very soon. You can still do the manual upgrades, and just make sure to check that nothing weird is going on with the dependencies in there. So that's kind of the only caveat we got here. Otherwise, same as always. It's you can download it from you can get it from NuGet. Yeah, I think that's
cloud. New projects on cloud will be 8.15 now. Yes,
very true.
Can't upgrade.
Yeah. So it's actually, I don't think there's a lot of people using Message Pack, for example, on their own. But if they are, they could run into issues if we introduce a different version with the upgrade, right? So that's probably that's actually what we're battling with at the moment. But yes, new sites are running 8.15 on Umbraco Cloud, and as I said, you can upgrade manually as well if you really want to get your hands on all the cool, shiny new things. Right, I think that's all I've got on the list. Any last parting words?
Viva 8.15.
Don't you mean Viva 8Chad?
8.Chad. All right. Thanks so much for joining, guys. And see you in the next one.
Yeah. Catch you later.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.